On February 28, 1927, Soviet biologist Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov entered his laboratory, which housed 2 adult female chimpanzees. With the help of his son, they attempted to inseminate the chimps with human sperm, but due to reproductive isolation, neither became pregnant. 2 years later, Ivanov died, and his experiments faded into obscurity until the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the secret research came to light, revealing this unethical biological experiment. Ivanov was once a prominent figure in biology, studying at the Pasteur Institute in Paris. After returning to Russia, he focused on reproductive experimentation and became a pioneer in artificial insemination, receiving royal support to fund his research. Despite being a progressive thinker and creative researcher, he faced significant opposition, particularly from religious groups that viewed artificial insemination as an affront to divine authority. Science challenged these religious boundaries, as many scientists believed this technology could treat infertility but hesitated to conduct overt experiments due to social and religious pressures. By 1911, there were only 21 reported cases related to artificial insemination, reflecting the concerns of livestock breeders at the time. Published by Medical Weekly, Ivanov, facing prolonged depression, pushed forward with bold experiments despite a conservative environment. He believed artificial insemination could mass-produce high-quality horse breeds, a proposal met with strong opposition from agricultural authorities. Undeterred, he conducted his experiments publicly, achieving significant success and gaining wealth and fame. By the time he reached his research station, Ivanov had completed 6,804 experiments, most of which were highly successful. As the technology advanced, he began private hybrid experiments with various animals, like crossbreeding rabbits with zebras and donkeys with chimpanzees. By 1910, driven by his obsession, Ivanov attended the International Zoological Congress, where he controversially proposed using human evolution to create a new species, which alarmed the audience. His radical ideas stirred significant fear among his peers. The technology had matured enough to consider crossing species boundaries, potentially creating a multiracial human. Ivanov believed this was the ideal time to begin experiments, but most scholars at the meeting disagreed with his plans. Back in Russia, Ivanov faced many unfinished research tasks and lacked the energy for his ambitious ideas. The October Revolution decimated the nobility and shattered his funding sources, leaving him unemployed and idle. In 1925, the head of the Soviet government stumbled upon Ivanov's scientific documents and expressed strong interest in hybrid experiments, allocating some funds for his work. However, financial issues weren't the only hurdles. In the 1820s, Western scientists were just beginning to study African primates, and research facilities were rudimentary at best. Most scientists were focused on teaching chimps music or language, neglecting their physiological structure. This lack of understanding proved fatal for Ivanov's experiments. For instance, he once purchased 700 chimpanzees, but half died during transport, and the surviving ones were all juveniles, rendering them incapable of reproduction, ultimately thwarting his research efforts. The juvenile chimpanzees were indeed incapable of reproduction, which rendered them useless for Ivanov's breeding experiments. Subsequently, he became obsessed with studying chimp anatomy, raising concerns among his research staff about his intentions. They warned him to abandon some of his more radical ideas, knowing that public knowledge of these experiments would cause an uproar. Faced with this dilemma, Ivanov decided to travel to Paris to establish his own research organization and develop a new plan. On October 24, 1926, he arrived in France, accompanied by his 22-year-old son, who was studying biochemistry at the University of Mexico and fully supported his father's breeding experiments. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union faced a financial crisis, and staff members began contacting Ivanov to inform him of the situation. Funding was no longer available, and Ivanov urgently needed human hybrid samples to secure more financial support. After several days of hunting, he finally captured 3 adult chimpanzees. However, local tribes warned him that chimpanzees were considered a degraded race, and any woman involved with them would be shunned and deemed untouchable for life, as their creator had rejected them. Due to these cultural and ethical concerns, Ivanov kept his hybrid experiments secret from the local people. He had to conduct his research covertly, disguising human samples as various items. Once in the lab, he worked quickly and discreetly, preparing for the possibility of being discovered by keeping 2 handguns on hand. If an emergency arose, he planned to flee the laboratory. Ivanov reportedly injected his own sperm into 2 female chimpanzees, hastily conducting the procedure to avoid detection. Without standard protocols or tools, he performed the injections directly. Soon after, the chimpanzees went into estrus, indicating the experiment had failed. Undeterred, Ivanov decided to focus on one adult female chimpanzee for a new round of experiments, contemplating a different approach that involved using male samples for the next attempt. He began to think that injecting male samples into black female chimpanzees could be a way to control a larger number of female sources. By mastering this larger pool, he believed he could conduct large-scale experiments that would be more likely to succeed. In contrast, he thought he could manage with only 2 to 3 adult males and a small number of females for countless breeding experiments. This line of thinking sent chills down my spine. It was indeed a twisted idea, and even I felt it was disturbingly perverse. Despite his earlier failures, Ivanov decided to return to the Soviet Union with his son and the remaining chimpanzees in search of female volunteers. Meanwhile, the Soviet Academy of Sciences discovered Ivanov's attempts to deceive local women about the nature of his experiments and decided to withdraw their support, officially ordering him to return to veterinary work. While he found the veterinary field tedious and uninspiring, he persevered for the sake of survival. Not long after, Stalin initiated the Cultural Revolution, which brought a new opportunity for Ivanov. The Academy of Sciences reconsidered his hybridization program and promised full funding for his research, allowing his findings to be recognized and published globally. In this context, Ivanov began publicly recruiting female volunteers for his experiments. In the Soviet Union, 5 female volunteers quickly signed up for Ivanov's experiments. He imposed strict rules. The volunteers had to sign contracts and live in isolation for a year, without asking about the source of the samples. Once a volunteer became pregnant, they were to follow the medical staff's arrangements after giving birth, with no one allowed to see the child. Not even a glance, the institute would take the baby away immediately. This situation raises serious ethical concerns. The women were unaware of what was being injected into them, and the experiments lacked clear procedures. Ultimately, Ivanov was arrested for revolutionary activities and exiled, dying in Kazakhstan, while the 5 women faced charges of crimes against humanity, receiving life sentences. Alarmingly, the authorities had hoped Ivanov could create hybrid soldiers. Tireless and pain-resistant. Many viewed this as a troubling experiment with race. Although Japan approved hybrid experiments, none have succeeded thus far. My channel explores the mysteries of the universe, so if you're interested, please subscribe. See you next time.